going to welcome Reverend Katie Dawson as our first keynoter. Happy that you're here, but I'm guessing that she probably came the furthest to be with us today. She's from Des Moines, Iowa. She's at Emmanuel Church there, the pastor. She did her undergraduate work at Simpson College in Ohio, and her Iowa. This is let's see, this Saturday is Iowa, right? And she did her MDiv at Vanderbilt, and happens to know one of our other speakers here, and they might share a little something about one another. We don't know about that. She's married and has 3 cats. She loves to garden, and we are so excited to have her with us and to hear what she has to tell us today. Now, on the tables back there, when you eat, there is a book that she has written, and you are welcome to take it. You have to decide among yourselves who gets it. So we don't want to see any single person sitting at a table by him or herself, so we know what you're about. So we're delighted. It is free. It is a free book.
But only one per table.
One per table, so no fighting over it. All right. Katie, we're happy to have you with us. Welcome.
Thank you so much. It is a joy to be with all of you this weekend. I feel really humbled to even be asked, I have to admit, because I don't typically think of myself as an expert on climate change or creation care or theology. I'm a pastor, so I'm a pretty practical person. I think about how this applies in my local context, and I don't often get a chance to spend a lot of time doing a lot of the thinking and theology, but I know what it's like to navigate these conversations in a local church, and that's part of the impetus behind the book that I've written. It's called All Earth is Waiting, and it's an Advent study, and it is designed for congregations to use in order to have some conversations about what really are we supposed to be doing while we wait for Christ. Because Advent is not just about waiting for the birth of Christ, but also waiting for Christ to come again. And so how should we be waiting, and what is the earth waiting for? And so there's some practical things, and some of the scriptures I lift up in there are some things I want to share with you today. Now, I'm also a preacher, but usually my church only gives me 15 minutes to talk, so I have to admit I'm excited to have a little bit more time to wrestle and spend with you. I think one of the most important places that we all need to start is with our context. How many of you here are doing ministry in a rural context? How many of you have a rural context for ministry? Got a few. What about in small towns? Because that's a different dynamic than rural context. You've got some small towns. What about urban settings? A lot more urban settings. Well, let me tell you a little about my context. In much of my life in ministry, I've kind of straddled the line between urban and rural, and I see how interconnected they are. I grew up in a small town just south of Cedar Rapids, Iowa. My dad works for Quaker Oats. Quaker Oats feeds the world. But one of the interesting things about Quaker Oats is that we import all the oats from outside the state of Iowa because we grow corn and beans in Iowa. My dad, when he's not working at Quaker Oats, he grows corn and beans like most conventional farmers in the state. My first congregation was in town called Marengo. It was near that area, and just south of us was Williamsburg. Williamsburg is the headquarters of Holden Foundation Seeds, and about 10 years before I arrived, Holden was bought by Monsanto. And so Monsanto's influence is felt all throughout that entire county because it supplies the money for the schools and for education and provides jobs, and so, living in the midst of that community, that's a strong presence. Emmanuel, where I serve now, is in a residential part of Des Moines. It's a big city. It's known for bike trails. It's a bright blue dot in the middle of a red region. It's known for its arts and food, and there's lots of farm-to-table opportunities. The But if you drive 15 minutes from my building, you'll find yourself in a farm in the middle of a field. And my church has folks who grew up on the farm and moved into the city as they retired, but we also have folks who used to live in the city and are escaping the city, and so now they've moved out into the countryside. So there's this kind of really interesting dynamic there. Now, before I came to this church, I knew this congregation had an active and engaged green team. It was plastered all across the website. You walk in the doors, and every single door in the church has this sign on it: "We are a cool congregation. Please keep doors closed." And so they upgraded the HVAC system so they could do zone control. So we only turn on the rooms where we're actually using things that day. And they've done great work with that. They're active in the Iowa Interfaith Power and Light work. They're working with a citywide green team now. Lots of churches pulling their resources together. And I learned my church has folks who deny climate change.
Imagine that.
Imagine that. How many of you have folks in your congregation like that? We took just a brief kind of survey of how our ministry situations are located and the realities we discover in every one of those places are different. And I imagine that some of you have come here today. I kind of have two reasons in the back of my head. Maybe you're looking for solidarity and community and you want to know that you're not alone. Yeah, so there's some of that. You just want to gather with some like-minded folks. But I imagine that some of us are also here because there's something happening in our context that we're struggling with. Maybe there's something that we're aware of and we're looking for resources, we're looking for grounding, we're looking for some help, something to take home with us. And so I thought, kind of to set the stage, just to invite, maybe a couple of stories of seeing what you guys are wrestling with, what you're thinking about. I think this will turn out. How about my thought, I think? Yes. Okay. So if anyone wants to share something that's kind of happening in their context and their situation that they're thinking about and they're aware of and they want to share, just kind of to set the stage for what we're doing today. Anyone have something they want to share about their own context? Don't all talk at once. All right. Yeah, if you want to say your name when you talk, that'd be great.
So I'll model what I'd like to see, which would be seeing a face. I'm Dwayne Carlisle. I'm in Kokomo, Indiana. And I felt like in those descriptions that you named, my context was a name, which is I work in a city that doesn't feel like a city. It feels like a small town. So those confluences of sort of middle America small town values without the sort of progressive piece of it. And so what I struggle with is finding partners, like-minded people who kind of stay on the down low about wanting to care for the earth when there are so many more deniers and the economy is more important than the way that we live our lives. So that's my context.
Anyone else relate? Is that a similar place? Yeah.
I'm Bob Glass from the Robin Run Retirement Community here in Northwest Indianapolis. And John Gibson here on my left and I are active leaders in our green team at Robin Run for about 8 years now. And now we're working with Pike High School in environmental science teachers and working with the young people, and they're going to be involved with us in building a resilient community in Pike Township. We just met on Wednesday of this week with the new superintendent of schools in Pike Township, and she's going to be giving leadership, calling leaders from all over Pike Township together as we begin to plan to build a resilient community in Pike Township together.
Very cool. That's great, that kind of intergenerational work and bridging between communities and schools is really important. Any other context? Where are you at? Where are you struggling with? Yeah.
Hi, my name is Mike Olis. I am a lifelong Indiana United Methodist. I serve Union Chapel United Methodist as a staff person and troublemaker. At 86 in Keystone here in Indianapolis. So I have served the church as a layperson in suburban context and in urban context in some pretty exciting ways. And one of the things that I've struggled with as a Methodist in my home church, I was able to get my church a huge grant for solar panels. Nice big Methodist suburban church. Some people have heard this story. It was going to be a great way for kids at the preschool to see solar every day. And our church rejected the free money for the solar panels. And I think they thought it was some sort of liberal Obama conspiracy or something. And it was really about getting our congregation solar panels. But we have had about 30 congregations through Hoosier Interfaith Power and Light and some other allies get solar panels across the state. So you can go from South Bend and Gary down to Jeffersonville, through Indianapolis, Fort Wayne, Muncie, Bloomington, and see the work that people of faith are doing just in terms of getting their churches greened up and getting them solar panels. And so it's exciting to see what's possible when people of faith have courage and speak out for the environment, and it really changes the game. And so that's just sort of some of my context.
Absolutely. Well, I think one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about is how do you reach folks, and I think we heard this in a couple of different places, who may not, let me switch now, who may not have a sense of, may not read the scriptures the same way we do, may start in a different place theologically speaking, and how do you initiate this conversation when science is not necessarily going to be the place that they want to start? And that's really the reality that I confronted in my own congregation. I had this gentleman in particular who came up to me and he sat me down and he said, "Pastor Katie, I have a problem with your sermon this last Sunday." It was Earth Day and I talked about climate change and creation care. He said, "Now here's the thing, I believe that the sovereignty of God is the most important thing." And he said, "If God is the Lord of all creation and the maker of all things, how arrogant is it for us to think that we mere mortals could change the reality that surrounds us?" So he wasn't starting in a place of denying science. He was starting in a place of thinking about God as the creator and that emphasis upon God's power that we're just ants, we're minuscule, we can't do anything. And then he went on, we kind of dialogued. He said, "How can we claim that the changes we see happening are not God's intention for our planet? Maybe this is what God wants." And then as we kept talking, another question that he raised, Jesus Christ is the Savior of this world, not us. And so if there's a problem, maybe it's punishment for our sins, or maybe it's something that God will solve in God's time. So that's kind of the place that I started. It was a different way of thinking about how we interact with the world, but it really got me thinking that I haven't done a lot of work in thinking about the theology of creation care beyond this kind of simple, we need to be stewards and caretakers sort of a mindset. I looked at Genesis and I knew that we were called to care for this world. I knew that science was pointing to problems. I felt the call to respond, but this parishioner needed more. And so one of the things I've been trying to do in my book and in this work, I'm also kind of taking this and we'll do this together as a church this Advent as well, is to try to introduce a different sort of conversation and kind of think about how we approach this topic. And this is going to sound a little bit scary, I suppose, but from the perspective of sin and death and hope. And so we're going to kind of go on that journey a little bit today. We talked about some practical things in my own congregation. Because we didn't quite all understand the theology, we were able to make some strategic investments because money people understand. And so the HVAC system happened because it was going to save the church money. We were also having an issue with our parking lot lights, and there were a lot of folks, we have lights on all night in our parking lot for safety reasons. We're in a residential neighborhood, but that really large parking lot, we were discovering drug paraphernalia and all sorts of things, and so we made the choice for safety for the neighborhood to keep the lights on. That was costing us a lot of money. And so we had a lot of debate, and we decided to look into LED lighting for our parking lot. And we had some initial estimates that this investment that we made in the LED lighting, that we could get back that investment in 3 to 5 years. And we decided that was a fairly significant timeline, that it would be doable. And so we went ahead, we made the investment, and we switched all of our lighting in the parking lot to LED. 2 years later, we've paid off those lights. It was just a drastic reduction in our electric bill. And things like Energy Star appliances, those kinds of things when we're making investments anyways in the church, to talk about ways that we can make these decisions. Solar panels would be another place. That what is the investment? What's the return on investment? We can have a different kind of conversation. My church is big on cool congregations. It's Interfaith Power and Light, and you can go to coolcongregations.org. They have carbon footprints for congregations and for households, and it's a great place to start. And especially if you're thinking kind of the more financial aspect, it's a good place. Are you thinking?
We have a local version here too at HoosierIPL.org.
Yes,
Hoosier
Hoosier.
program, but local context.
Excellent. So talk to Mike if you need more information about that. But there was also this reality that even though we were making all these financial investments, that may not have been the best motivation. So I knew that we still needed to talk about how we as Christians, as people of faith, think about the threats facing our planet. We needed something more than money to motivate us. I'm a person that likes to I preach with the Bible in one hand and the newspaper in the other. So I often think about what's happening in our world and what God says to that. And last summer, our local water utility, Des Moines Waterworks, they filed a lawsuit against 3 counties who were farther north of the Raccoon River from us. The suit argued that high levels of nitrates were coming into the Raccoon River from fertilizer runoff. And so there was a technicality that they did not believe that those drainage districts were properly permitted according to the Clean Water Act. And these districts said, we don't have to be permitted, this is public use. So there's been a big fight about this, and it's all over the papers. And so, if I'm committed to paying attention to what's happening in the world and asking how God's Word speaks to that, then right here in this situation, I had folks who were upset on both sides. And that lawsuit and this heated debate in the community, it provided an opportunity for me to kind of start digging deeper into what really is the relationship between God and humanity and the environment, and how could we maybe come at this a different way so we could reach people who may not start in the same place as me. I think relationship is really the key word there. One of the resources I turned to as part of that work was a pastoral letter written by the Council of Bishops in 2009. It's called God's Renewed Creation, A Call to Hope and Action, and maybe you've seen this. There's a line from it. It says, we no longer see a list of isolated problems affecting disconnected people, plants, and animals. The threats to peace, people, and planet Earth are related to each other.
That's right.
And Pope Francis made the same point. I'm proud of our bishops for making it first. And Laudato Si, he said the human environment and the natural environment, they deteriorate together. We cannot adequately combat environmental degradation until we attend to causes related to human and social degradation. I think Tim Van Meter is going to talk a little bit later, about the table. Are you still kind of working around the table as an image? Yeah. And so he's going to talk a little bit more about relationship and what it means to be in a relationship. And a place that I want to start is the relationship between sin and the environment. Because everywhere I started to look in the scriptures, I was reminded that creation care is not just part of our job description as Christians, it's fundamental to our salvation. Our redemption is connected to the redemption of the planet. If you think about where we're going, the new creation, it's not just this place that we get to go. It's a recreation of this earth. We are connected. I think right there is a different place to start this conversation, not only with the folks who read the scriptures differently from ourselves, but I think also for those who don't want to talk about science at all. We can talk about salvation. We can talk about sin. We can talk about redemption. So what I'd like to do this morning is kind of dive into some scriptures that have helped me reframe that conversation. And Tim's the other Tim, he's gonna look at the creation story with us. I want to start with the Apostle Paul and how the Apostle Paul took the creation narrative and the fall and really applied that human condition to his own time. And I think what we discover when we read Paul, especially the letter to the Romans, is that he believed that our salvation and redemption are linked with this planet. It starts in Romans 1. Paul looks out at creation, and Paul sees that creation is full of stories about who God is, but we refuse to honor the God we meet in this world. And all that diversity and abundance of creation, it should have led us to praise and worship our Maker, but instead we turn to idols. And it's the next page. So instead we turn to idols. We were supposed to honor God by caring for the creation, but we traded God's truth for a lie. We worship and serve the creation instead of the Creator. And I think, we're not worshiping and serving, the earth and the sky, the trees. We're serving ourselves. We are the creation. We forgot that we belong to God and that this world belongs to God. If you go a few more pages into the letter to the Romans, Paul talks about how through the sin of Adam, death has come into this world. Just as through one human being, sin came into the world, death came through sin, so death has come to everyone. So everyone has sinned. I thought about this in light of those questions from my parishioner about God's sovereignty and design and plan. And I think right here we see a place that our human action and sin impacts the world. Because of our sin, death has come into the world. The question this raises is one that I've seen a lot of discussion about. A lot of theologians disagree about this. It's the question, is this passage about human death only, or about all the ways in which sin and death wreak misery and decay and corruption wherever they go? N.T. Wright even asks in his commentary on Romans, was death really a stranger in the world until Adam's sin? We look towards that new creation where death and decay are no more, don't we? But wasn't that God's intention for creation to begin with? So something we did changed the way this world is. I want to invite us to think aloud for just a minute. What are some of the realities of misery, death, corruption? What are some things that we experience every single day that we would imagine are not part of God's intention for creation? What are some things we experience that were not part of God's intention for creation?
Mass shootings.
Mass shootings.
We might have experienced a lot of kids go to bed hungry.
Kids go to bed hungry.
Health issues based on what's going on in the environment.
Health issues based on what's going on in the environment.
Farmers are so few in number that your occupation is not even listed on the census tract.
So farmers are now so few in number, it doesn't even show up on the census. Homelessness.
How about the knowledge that we're drifting towards nuclear war?
We're drifting towards nuclear war. Excessive pollution. We have enough, I know. We have enough. All these things we imagine realities of a post-fall creation, aren't they? Our scriptures tell us that the first sin, the first rejection of God's intention for creation, has a lasting impact on the world. When we sin, we imitate that first sin. And in many ways, we can't help it. Our very human interaction with the world has been changed because of Adam. I want to go back and explore that for a moment. I notice Paul never talks about Eve, but she's part of the story too. Our faith claims that when Adam and Eve ate of the forbidden fruit in the garden in Genesis 3, everything changed. There were consequences. God starts handing out punishment for this act, for the snake and the two humans, but all of creation is wrapped up in it as well. Cursed is the fertile land because of you. In pain, you will eat of it from every day of your life. This isn't just about the people, though. Weeds and thistles will grow for you. Even as you eat the field's plants, by the sweat of your face you will eat bread until you return to the fertile lands. Now, how many of you know Joy to the World, Isaac Watts? Now, he talked about how fields and floods, rocks, hills, and plains repeat the sounding joy, right? And so we know that creation is singing along. But he also has a verse that talks about this curse. No more let sins and sorrows grow, nor thorns infest the ground. He comes to make his blessings flow far as the curse is found. Because human life is interwoven with this planet, our sin cursed creation. It has an impact on the planet. This is what the prophets kept reminding the people. Natural disasters and droughts and destruction, they often came in the wake of human transgression. That was the lens that the prophets saw those events through. We find these all throughout scriptures. I could lift up a lot, but I just want to start with Isaiah 24. The earth dries up and wilts, the world withers and wilts, the heavens wither away with the earth lies polluted under its inhabitants, for they have disobeyed instruction, swept aside law, and broken the ancient covenant. That could apply to us here in 2017. Now I have to tell you, I am one of the first people in the world to cringe and reject people like Pat Robertson when they come up on television and they blame natural disasters on whatever they think will drive up their ratings that week. But I wonder if perhaps we are too quick to reject or explain away these ancient texts that remind us that the earth, the world, the heavens suffer because of human sin. Now, I don't know about you, but I think we can only talk about systemic sins if we're willing to talk about individual sins. They're two sides of the same coin. And if we want to work for change, then we need to be able to point to those places where there is injustice and sin and wrongdoing, and we need to be able to name it as such. So I want you to think with me, what are some man-made disasters that we have experienced in the last couple of decades, and what were the sins behind them? What are some man-made disasters we've experienced, and what are the sins behind them? I'll give you one to start with.
How about the Monsanto?
How about the application of Agent Orange in Vietnam? And Monsanto is the manufacturer of that product.
Maybe after each one, let's just say, Lord have mercy.
Lord have mercy. Changes in the water, and the air we breathe.
Lord have mercy. Over here, in the circles.
Extremely toxic levels of lead in the water in Flint, Michigan.
Lord have mercy. I think about wildfires in the western part of the United States, simply started by carelessness, people who forgot to put out fires. Lord have mercy.
when dams or bridges break, and we find that behind that was corruption in purchasing and installation and greed.
Lord have mercy.
Just deep and pervasive racism that allows us to can't figure out why the white guy shot all those people. Kind of wishes, you know.
Lord have mercy.
Lord have mercy.
The Japanese nuclear disaster, Chernobyl, and 3 Mile Island.
Lord have mercy.
The poisoning of the air in southwest Indiana because of coal pollution.
Lord have mercy.
Fracking and earthquakes.
Lord have mercy. It's a lot to confess. That's a lot to repent from. You know, in most of these instances, we can point to ways that it's our human bent towards sinning. Whether it's greed or pride or selfishness or carelessness that leads to these disasters. I mentioned that conflict in Iowa about nitrate levels, but I could just as well be talking about, you know, water rights in the West, or, you know, the local realities here about coal. What we see is the choices we make in one location impact the whole of creation in another. Everything's connected, everything's in relationship. And one of the things that's really hard to acknowledge is those nitrate levels in my water supply are not just about the practices of farmers upstream. Because each of them are only trying to respond to the demands of the market. So they're doing the best they can to put food on the table in the situation they live in. And that's impacted by our choices as consumers. And so it's easy to point fingers upstream, but it's far more difficult to take responsibility for how my desire for hamburgers and ethanol and sugary soda made from high fructose corn syrup have created the market, which makes that possible, and which has a negative impact on our ecology. Man-made disasters. What about natural disasters? What about the destruction and the loss of life and property and crops from Harvey or Irma or Maria? And if we keep following the argument of Paul in the letter to the Romans, we're reminded that it was our selfishness and the sin of Adam that we continue to repeat that brought death into the world to begin with. I don't think that means that these deadly forces of wind and rain are God's will, any more than death and disease are God's will. But they are signs and reminders of the brokenness of creation. This is how things are in a post-fall world. As I've done reflection upon this and kind of this natural disaster aspect, I've turned to the prophet Joel. One of the first laws given to Moses and the Israelites were future curses promised for those who don't obey God's instruction. And part of that promised curse was locusts. That's what Joel was dealing with. An army of locust invaders ruined vines and trees and left the land in mourning. And in the wake of that destructive power, Joel preaches not only to the people, but to the land as well. And we don't know exactly what the sin of these people was. Joel never mentions it. He just calls them to return to the Lord. Return to me with all your hearts, with fasting, with weeping, with sorrow. Tear your hearts and not your clothing. But he also has good news. Don't fear, fertile land. Rejoice, for God is about to do great things. You know, in the midst of suffering and oppression and judgment, it's hard to hear God's good news. But Joel encourages the people and creation to set aside their fears and hear the good news. If the people repented, when the people repented, as the people repented, God became passionate about the land and had pity on the people, Joel 2:18 says. You know, I think my parishioner is actually right. God will restore the land and the people, but we have to repent. We need to change our ways. My community in Iowa experienced devastating flooding in 2008. One of the factors that led to the severity of that flood was that we stopped dredging the river. We used to dredge the river every summer and kind of take out all the sediment and silt and trees. It created space for that water to go. The second is we kept building on areas that would have naturally absorbed that water. So we built on the floodplains. We put up housing developments. Urban sprawl caused that flood to be worse than it could have been. Some articles I've read say the same thing about Hurricane Harvey in Houston. There's a great article in the Atlantic about it. In many ways, we saw those horrific pictures of the flooding in the highways, but that was actually encouraged. That's how the city was designed. The city was designed so that was where the water would run, because they knew that they kept building. 600 square miles, I think, is what I hear the area of Houston is now. And, all that water has to go someplace. So there's a slight increase in temperatures with climate change. We can talk a lot about the causes of human impact on climate change. Expansive urban sprawl. And when you combine those things, 60 inches of rainfall and no soil left to absorb it. And you've got devastation. How much of that is nature and how much of that is us? I go back farther, and I think a parallel between Joel's time and our experience is the Dust Bowl of the 1930s, and how human action increased the devastation of that drought. The plains of North America were filled with grasses and shrubs, and they had these incredible root systems. They ran deep into the soil, they enriched the earth, and those plants knew how to withstand adversity. But we wanted to live on that land. And so we tore apart those deep roots and we replaced them with annual wheat. We loosened the soil, we wanted good airflow to help it grow. And when those deep roots were gone and the drought came, the soil just blew away. There was nothing left to hold it. Just as you and I are torn and grieving and we're searching for ways to mend and restore and heal in the wake of tragedies and destruction, creation is longing as well. If we keep following Paul's argument in the letter to the Romans, he writes, creation was subjected to frustration, not by its own choice. It's a choice of the one who subjected it, God, but in the hope that creation itself will be set free from slavery to decay and brought into the glorious freedom of God's children. Our sin, our grasping after idols, our disobedience subjected creation to forces beyond its control. In John Wesley's explanatory notes on this passage, he talks about how creation becomes subject to abuse, misery, and corruption by God, but it was Adam who made it liable to the sentence God pronounced. Go all the way back to Genesis. Adam's sin results in the curse of the earth. Because of our sin, creation is trapped in decay and life and death. This is kind of hard for me to even wrap my head around, but even the nature of the cyclical nature of the seasons, life and death, we're trapped in it. Okay, so where's the good news? There's been a lot of sin and death. Well, if you remember, one of the consequences of sin way back in Genesis was labor pains. I will make your pregnancy very painful, and in pain you will bear children. I stumbled upon an image that I think really took my breath away. It's drawn by Sister Grace Remington. She's a member of the Cistercian Sisters of the Mississippi Abbey in Iowa. And this image is called Virgin Mary Consoles Eve. And Eve is there clad only in her flowing locks of hair and clutching that piece of fruit. Her legs entwined in the grip of a snake, her head is hung in shame. Evil, sin, and death are her legacy. It's our legacy. But I love it. She reaches out with one hand and she places her hand on Mary's womb. And Mary stands there full of grace and mercy. She gently touches the face of Eve as if to tell her it's okay. And she holds her other hand over Eve's. And together they experience the life of the one who was coming to redeem and restore creation. There were going to be labor pains. There's going to be suffering because that child born at Christmas is going to give up his life for the sake of the world. There's immense hope in this picture. Paul talks about in Romans 8. We know that the whole creation is groaning together and suffering labor pains up until now. It's not only the creation, we ourselves who have the Spirit as the first crop of the harvest, we also groan inside as we wait to be adopted and for our bodies to be set free. We were saved in hope. You know, the word Paul uses here for groaning describes the pain of childbirth. Creation is suffering labor pain. Something new is about to be born. But the groaning of this birth is not the same as the curse pronounced upon the land and the serpent. Through this suffering, God's love for the world would become known. You know, I look at that text too often and I pay attention to the groaning. And I think it sounds really depressing. Instead of diving in to see the good news, what if the groans of this world are labor pains? What if creation is about to be delivered, to be released, to be set free, to become what God intends for it to be? We have all these images of what it means to be people who care about this world, caretakers or stewards. But what about being a midwife? You know, the word midwife expresses accompaniment, to be with, mid, the wife, the woman giving birth. It also has been used to describe one who helps bring something into being or into existence. And I think we as people of faith are called to midwife, to bring into being by our actions the kingdom of God, the new heaven and the earth that we long for. As people of faith, we're evangelists, right? We share the good news of God with this world, and we hope that more and more people will shed the selfishness of sin and turn their hearts to God. In that sense, I think we have to believe that no person is a finished job, a static person with their eternal fate set in stone. Last night, I had a chance to go hear Carrie Newcomer and Gary Walters and Parker Palmer, and one of the things Parker Palmer said was, people can change. Evangelism requires the confidence that God isn't finished with someone yet, right? And God isn't finished with the planet either, and so the work of evangelism also needs to be about the work of hope for creation. Now, we experience as we journey with people who are going through life changes all the time, and when we do so, we have to acknowledge the reality of sin, and we have to trust that God can and will bring about redemption if we keep walking with that person. We don't do it. We don't bring about that change. God does. But what we're ultimately saying is that the forces of sin, evil, and death no longer have power over that person, right? What if we did the same with the planet? You know, Paul keeps pointing back to Adam in the letter to the Romans because Adam shows us what God first intended. When we look to Adam's story, when we look to the creation, we see what we long for. But I think it's important to carry that story all the way through to Paul. N.T. Wright says that Christ is the human project begun in Adam, but it wasn't complete. It went wrong. And so in Christ, now God's intentions can fully be restored. At the beginning, there was a part for us to play. We were not just supposed to tend the garden. We carry the image of God. We are co-creators. And we were supposed to help creation become its best possible self. Now that Christ is born into our lives, now that we claim the Spirit of God, that sets us free, we have to take up that task again. Paul tells the community of faith we have an obligation to live as God's sons and daughters right here and right now, not for our sake, not for selfish reasons, but because the earth is waiting for us to do so. The whole creation waits breathless with anticipation for us to be revealed. We're called to bring God's hope and grace not only to our neighbors, but to this planet. One of the theologians I've grown to love is Joseph Sittler. He asks, the whole creation is waiting for the children of God to begin to act like they are. The world's waiting for us to begin to act like the children of God. I mentioned the Dust Bowl. It's a modern example of Joel. Had farmers chosen to implement different sorts of agricultural practices? Had they better understood their soil and environment? Had they demonstrated land stewardship, the devastation of the Dust Bowl could have been diminished. Had the Israelites never turned away from the Lord, their own agricultural disaster might have been averted as well. We have to learn from our experiences. We have to implement different practices. We have to change our ways. We have to repent. Today, I think we need to keep asking that question. Are there things we're doing? Are our practices of consumption or farming or eating, are they helping this planet to thrive? Or are they helping to birth the new creation? Are we sharing the good news with the earth? Or do we treat it as something to be used and abused? Paul claims that the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ is our hope. But I think he says that the source of hope for the world is us. The whole creation is waiting for us to let go of being focused solely on what's best for us and to begin acting like the children of God. It's about sin, it's about death, it's about evangelism. I think those are some terms that folks in our congregations who may think a little bit differently understand. The earth is waiting for us to remember that our salvation spills over into this world. So I hope we can bring that new creation into being. I think it'll take all of us, but I think we can do it. I'm curious about any thoughts you might have or places where you see hope as we finish up. Where are some places that you see people claiming to be God's sons and daughters?
This is a little bit broader than that. I downloaded your book, by the way, if you decide on the computer later. So the image, by the way, is the Cistercian sisters. That's very powerful.
Yeah.
One, I think my reflection is, you talked about context earlier. Ours is at St. Mark's in Wilmington. Wilmington's a blue dot, kind of in the Red Sea, and so it's a little more quote-unquote progressive. And I noticed, and this is more confessional, that if I have a lectionary in front of me, I have to go to the gospel passage and not do Paul. And you were right to Romans 1, and those of us who are reconciling ministries know what's in that chapter, sort of how to avoid it, right? So it was interesting to hear you do that. So the two things that I think I'm curious about, I've noted that even among the progressive energies that I've experienced, it seems to me that the creation care is the hardest one to gain traction. I don't know why that is. And the other thing is, it seems to me, and this is especially down there at 12 Bay River right now, that, well, the presidency is complicated right now. And it seems to me, to use Eleanor Roosevelt's phrase, there's a lot more darkness cursing than candlelighting. And I think that's one thing I'm wondering about, is I think there are opportunities, and I hear some of the things that have happened here, but how we get to the place where we're actually doing something. And, we have some people from our church here too, so that's kind of what I'm really listening for. Yeah. So, yeah.
Thank you for those. And now I'm thinking about the second, and I forgot the first.
Oh, how environmental care seems to be part of the rest of one's.
Yeah, I don't know why that necessarily is, because I think for so many people that I worked with in my kind of more small county seat church, I had a lot of people who really understood conservation, but were fairly conservative. Well, the words go together. But they understood that their livelihood, they were intimately connected with the earth. And I think some of those values of being connected to the earth, for some reason we've lost. We've become really disconnected. And so I think even in some kind of more progressive strongholds, we aren't as connected to the source of where our food comes from or where things grow. We're not getting our hands dirty as much. And I wonder if that's part of it, is we don't see that cycle. Our livelihoods do not depend upon, making sure that the soil's healthy. We're disconnected in that way. So I think that's part of it. It's something I experienced. I know, it's easy to go to Whole Foods and not think about all the chain and steps in between. So I think that's part of it. As far as kind of some of those more practical, how do we start lighting candles and stop cursing the darkness? One of the things I was trying to figure out the balance between kind of laying the theological foundation and sharing some practical ideas, and that's one thing I really wanted to do in the book. And so there's a lot of ways to think about it. Something I've thought about as we make different choices about food is even how do we choose different grains? My dad is a conventional farmer. He grows corn and beans because that's what sells. If oats sold in Iowa, if other grains sold, if I could get him to grow hops, that's actually my goal. I think there's a market for that. But if we shifted the narrative, but part of that means that you and I have to make some different choices about what we choose to buy at the grocery store. And so I've even thought about how do we, when we're making our Christmas cookies this year, how do I buy different grains instead of just turning to the big bags of wheat flour?
On this issue of consumer choice as a way that we would change conditions in the market, I just would raise that the power of marketing, the power of messaging, and the power of subsidies and other distortions in the marketplace. So I guess I'm sort of rejecting the idea that if we all just make better choices, I mean, for those of us who are informed, but what about the billions of dollars that are spent in advertising?
Yeah. Do you have a response?
No.
Oh.
A different idea.
Oh, okay.
Is that all right?
I think it's good.
Okay. I grew up on a farm in central Illinois, and when I think about the changes that farm has made over the 100 years or so my family has owned it, one of the things that has left is that tree line along the road that had hedge apples that made for wonderful fighting equipment with their brothers. But when we lost a hedge row, then we started seeing erosion in the land. And I think one of the signs of hope, I think for us, is rebuilding that kind of virtual tree line boundary that helps us retain and keep some of that deep, rich soil. I mean, as you think of the images that holds for us, and not to be so greedy to plant out to the road so that when the wintertime comes and the wind comes and the dirt just blows away. So we have to put fences up now.
Now, we don't have the money necessarily to combat that advertising, but I love that image of how can we create hedgerows.
Yeah, I would like to lift up farmers markets as a sign of hope. And in Bloomington, pretty much our city employees help make that happen. And I really think that churches in smaller communities might want to work with farmers who want to do more sustainable crops and help build farmers markets in our smaller towns. Because it's wonderful what it's doing in a town like Bloomington, I think.
Absolutely. What are some other signs of hope or questions? I suppose we can give you the...
I know, I'm speaking a lot here, so I apologize, but I'm just thinking about this question of signs of hope, and if you go out today and breathe our air here in Indianapolis, it's not perfect, but it's the cleanest it's been in generations, maybe 60 and 70 years, because of people like Dennis Schock, who was an early adopter of the Harding Street Coal Plant campaign, or Marcus Case over there, who went and knocked on doors for months and months at a time to build a movement. Here in Indianapolis, we don't have to breathe toxic air. We don't have to accept the fact that we have a coal plant that's giving kids asthma. That we can fight for a future and a new creation. And so, Pastor Dennis, Dennis? So you should go shake his hand because there's a picture of Google Dennis Schock. He's on the circle, like one of the first clergy in the city protesting the Harding Street coal plant. And Marcus over there who knocked on hundreds and thousands of doors so that Indianapolis could have clean air. So people like that give me signs of hope.
People who are claiming they're God's sons and daughters.
I think there's a lot of reasons for hope and for not hope, but the Environmental Defense Fund is working with farmers around the Chesapeake Bay area, I think 300 farmers, teaching them how to apply nitrogen at the right amounts. Most farmers apply too much. And they made a science of working with them, and it's helped the Chesapeake Bay area tremendously, just by helping that drainage area, applying less nitrogen, but still getting the same production out of the crops. Things like that are very, very hopeful. I'm not sure how the church ties into that, but that's one. Another big sign is the decline of pricing for renewable energy. That is almost unforeseen and just unbelievable how that's coming down and changing the landscape.
John Dane with Hoosier Interfaith Power and Light. And I was down in Evansville this week meeting with the head of the Tri-State Creation Care Group. And one of the conversations we had, which is pretty interesting, Tom is his name, said we didn't start to recruit people by dealing with global warming and climate change because the concept was so big, but we started bottom up. We brought people in who liked to garden, to landscape, who kept bees. So they kind of identified different earth care projects for hobbies or applications and then built bottom up. I thought that was pretty interesting and hopeful.
Absolutely. I'm going to share a couple of books that I brought with me, some suggestions.
Well, as difficult as it is for someone in Bloomington to see a sign of hope in West Lafayette, what's going on among the scientists in the scientific community is really quite remarkable. And I want to speak especially about what's happened at Purdue, where just 4 or 5 years ago, they were reluctant to talk about the effect of all the chemicals on bees. And that's changed. Just in the last 4 or 5 years, they now will say, well, maybe it's not just the insecticides, or maybe it's not just this chemical or that, but we now have research that's pretty clear that the pollinators have been being destroyed by our behaviors. And for them to do that, and that university depends so heavily on agribusiness, is really quite a sign of hope. And so, as much as I hate to do it, kudos to Purdue University.
Thanks. A couple of resources I kind of just brought that I thought have been helpful. One is a book called Everyday Justice. It's by Julie Clausen. And it's about the global impact of our everyday choices. It's a great resource. Really simple, practical things that can change the world. A couple of theologians that have really kind of been informing me lately, Jürgen Moltmann, A God of Creation, has a lot of good stuff, and I mentioned Joseph Sittler. This book, Evocations of Grace, has a lot of essays and writings of his. One thing I didn't get a chance to talk about today, he talks about the Beatitudes, and talks about blessed are the meek. And growing up, he had a translation of the Bible. It was a Calvinist Bible. It was written in French. It was his grandma's. And it says, if you translate it, blessed are the debonair. And he unpacks that about how being debonair means treading lightly upon the world. It's entering the world as if you don't own it. It's really powerful. So I kind of recommend his stuff. And then you talked a little bit about kind of other vocations of getting into this. And I was part of an organic ministry class that we had in the Des Moines area. A retired pastor moved out to a farm and decided that he wanted to talk about ministry and soil and things that grow. And so we met once a month for a year out on the farm. We would have some readings that we do ahead of time, and we spent the morning in work. We had an amazing meal prepared by Tim and his wife Lori there on the farm. In the afternoon, we had Sabbath and we discussed our readings. And the kind of primary text was called The Third Plate. It's Field Notes on the Future of Food by Dan Barber. Dan Barber has, is it Blue Hill? I'm blanking. A restaurant and farm in New York. And he came at it from the perspective of what tastes good. You know, not what's best for the environment. And he discovered that it tastes better if you care for the environment. If the soil's richer, it tastes better. If you care for the animals, they taste better. You know, if an animal goes to slaughter and you've gently cared for it, it's going to taste better than if it's had a miserable existence. And so it's just a different lens. And we have a group at my church that's thinking about doing this chapter by chapter and doing like a dinner conversation, so having a meal and discussing a chapter like once a month. And so it's a different way of approaching the conversation, what tastes good. So those are kind of some things I want to leave you. And thank you so much for letting me be here today.